Hey guys, this is Jason with Answers for Hope. I'm sorry about the delay. We had some technical issues, so it took a little bit of time for us to get ready. Brenden Larson actually has joined us. I originally, in the event description, said it'd be Dustin Segers and I, but Brenden has also joined us as well. And this is a video basically to respond to some of the allegations that Alex Botten made concerning Scripture about the subject of rape in Deuteronomy 22. And
I'm sorry,
I think I've done this before.
We had some technical.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. I think I've done that at least 3 times since I started this Google Plus thing. But basically, we're just going to do a response to a video that Alex Botten posted concerning the rape in Deuteronomy 22. And it's interesting because that Alex says that there's really the context doesn't matter and that the context is clear. Unfortunately, he hasn't given us a cultural background, the grammatical syntax, in either the Greek or the Hebrew or anything like that. So it appears that whatever the context is, Alex has not explained it. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. But before I do want to say that Alex has asked to be a part of this hangout, and he's posted comments on all sorts of different accounts, his main account and his sock accounts, and I deleted all of them. I don't have any intention of inviting Alex Botten to this hangout, just as he didn't have any intention of inviting Tim to participate in any of the videos that he has been using to criticize him lately. Nor also he has made videos of me without inviting me to participate. So I'm not going to be inviting him. And if he does want an invitation, he is going to have to clean up his act and show a little bit better regard for the people that he criticizes, and also articulate that he cares about the truth, which he said that he didn't care about in my debate with them. So I'm not going to be allowing Alex to join this. I just want to get that out there so everybody knows about it. I don't want to hide it or anything. But I do want to address the issues of what Alex has brought up. And if you guys don't mind, Dustin or Brenden, I'm going to go ahead and screen share and start. And I'm just going to basically play through his video, and then we'll just dive into the issues. And of course, we'll be starting with the Deuteronomy, his comments on Deuteronomy chapter 22.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, if I can get them right. There we go. I'm such a noob to this stuff, I tell you. All right, I think this is it. All right. You guys may want to mute your mics while I play this video so it doesn't feedback or anything.
Don't take the feed dream cause you hate it. La la, la 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 la, ooh, baby.
Oh, yet again it's a lazy made with my phone type of video with Sky sitting quite close to the camera. Just a quick update on the whole thing with Surfer Brenden. I have asked Surfer Brenden to respond to my question. He is insisting that there's no problem with what the Bible says about rape. Let us remind ourselves what it says. It's in Deuteronomy. It says that if a woman is raped, then as long as her rapist pays her father off and marries her, he won't be punished. So she is not only raped, but then forced to marry her rapist. The other, even more worrying verse is saying that if a woman is raped in the city and doesn't cry out for help, then she is to be stoned to death because she didn't cry out. Now, if she's raped in the countryside, there's nobody there to hear her cry out, so she won't be stoned to death. Only the rapist will. I mean, at least the rapist gets stoned in both cases in that situation, unless he goes and pays the money to the. I don't know. But yeah, all the amounts of trying to claim context and all this kind of stuff is bullshit from these guys, because the context is clear. If you're raped in the countryside, there's no one to hear you when you cry out, so you don't have to cry out. You won't be stoned to death. However, if you're being raped in the city and you don't cry out, then you're to be stoned to death for not having cried out. So you're raped and then murdered, because God. Anyway, I've asked Surfer Brenden to explain this, and he seems to be less than forthcoming. He is
All right. So that's the part that he was talking about, Deuteronomy chapter 22. Now, notice that he said the context is clear, but he hasn't provided the grammatical context. He has not said anything about the syntax of the Greek or Hebrew. So he really hasn't provided any context except for, well, it does say that if the woman doesn't cry out, that she'll be stoned to death. But there is some important information about that, and I was planning on doing this hangout by myself initially, but when I told Dustin about it, Dustin said he had some really good information on Deuteronomy chapter 22. So, Dustin, if you don't mind, do you want to try and cover what Alex has said so far?
Sure, I'd be glad to. You've got three situations, really four, that are being dealt with in Deuteronomy 22, verses 13 and following. Alex only talked about two of them, but he conflates one legitimate passage that speaks of forcible rape. He conflates that with another passage that speaks of seduction and another one that speaks of adultery. Let me just read the relevant context beginning in Deuteronomy verse 22 and following. If a man is found lying with a married woman, and before I go on, I'm reading from the New American Standard Translation.
Okay.
If a man is found lying with a married woman, then both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman, and the woman, thus you shall purge the evil from Israel. And so the death penalty through and through under the Mosaic law for adultery was death, was execution. There's reasons for that. I'm not going to get into those at this point in time. Maybe we could do that later. Verse 23, it says, if there's a girl who is a virgin, engaged to a man, and another man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of the city, and you shall stone them to death. The girl, because she did not cry out in the city, and the man, because he has violated his neighbor's wife. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. Verses 23 and 24 is referring to a case of adultery. This has nothing to do with rape. The word that's used here is patah in the Hebrew, and for the word lies with, and it refers to a word that's used in the context of adultery. It has nothing to do with rape. So the idea the woman did not cry out, she didn't cry out because she was consensual. She was engaged or betrothed to another man and was trying to have a fling on the side, and so as a result was violating her marriage covenant, because for the Jews, marriage consisted of two parts, both the betrothal and the official wedding ceremony. The betrothal, as we see if we've ever studied the situation with Joseph and Mary, they were betrothed for a year, and hence the controversy. And during that time, there was supposed to be no sexual activity. So they say, well, Jesus was born of a illegitimate birth, and so that's where the controversy comes from there, because during that time they were considered married. It was as good as married during the betrothal period under the Jewish system, but it wasn't until the consummation of the marriage took place at the actual second part of the marriage ceremony that the husband and wife were actually able to consummate their marriage with sexual intercourse. So what we have here, we have a girl who is engaged to a man, a virgin, and she's in the first phase of the marriage process under the Hebraic system. And another man finds her in the city and lies with her. This is consensual. She doesn't cry out, which indicates that this is consensual, and so both of them shall be stoned to death as penalty for adultery under the Old Covenant. And this is why I began with verse 22, because what's happening is Moses is setting the stage for what's to come. He's setting the stage for the basic understanding of sexual ethics under the Old Covenant. Now, then we have in verse 25 through 27, then we have a situation where this is indeed forcible rape. So this is the second case that's being dealt with here that's relative to our conversation. Verse 25 says, but if in the field, this is out in the countryside, the man finds the girl who is engaged, and the man forces her. This is a different Hebrew word. This is not patach. This is chazach. This is the word for rape. The man forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lies with her shall die. This is consistent with the rest of the Old Covenant law. The death penalty was issued for rape. But you shall do nothing to the girl. There is no sin in the girl worthy of death. For just as a man rises against his neighbor and murders him, so is this case. So this is case law. Because when he found her in the field, the engaged girl cried out. There was no one to save her. Okay, she cried out in opposition to what was being done to her, hence the difference in the Hebrew word that's used in verse 25. The word forces her. Notice the difference in the word forces here, Hebrew chasach, and the word in verse 23, lies with. I want you to just pay attention to that. That's important. This is where the grammar and the syntax is important. So we have verses 23 and 24 refers to a case of adultery during the first part of the marriage process. Verses 25 through 27 speaks of forcible rape that takes place during the first part of the marriage process, the betrothal period. And then we have verses 28 and 29. I'm going to read that. This also is referring to the first part of the marriage ceremony, the betrothal period. Verse 28, if a man finds a girl who is a virgin, excuse me, I'm sorry, this is not referring to the betrothal period. I was mistaken there. If a man finds a girl who is a virgin, so this is a girl that has not entered into a marriage covenant yet. There's been no betrothal process that's been given. There's been no exchange of the dowry or anything of that nature. A man finds a girl who's a virgin who is not engaged and seizes her and lies with her, and they are discovered. Then the man who lay with her shall give to the girl's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall become his wife because he has violated her. He cannot divorce her all his days. Okay, so Alex says that this is a case of a girl who has been raped, and she is forced to marry the rapist. The first thing is, let's get into a little bit of Hebrew again. Remember, we have verse 23 and 24 refers to adultery. The phrase lies with is the word patach. We have in verse 25 forces her. This is the Hebrew word chasach. This is the word that's used to refer to forcible rape. This is a legitimate rape. And only the man is punished because the woman was violated. Then we have verse 28 and 29. We have in verse 28, this is another Hebrew word, different Hebrew word. It's the Hebrew word tapas. It says seizes her. This is a weaker verb than forces in verse 25. And it says, and lies with her. This is the word patach. And they are discovered. This is not forcible rape, contra verse 25. This is the seduction of an unengaged virgin. This is indeed a pressured seduction. And basically it would fall under our modern conception of what would be equivalent to a statutory rape. In other words, a willing, consensual, sexual relation took place here, but it was pressured. Okay? This is case law that's dealing with a statutory rape situation, what would be equivalent to our modern statutory rape. This word here, seizes, is the Hebrew word tapas. It is weaker than the word forces, chasach, in verse 25. This is a seduction of an unengaged woman. So this is not a forcible rape. And so the context is key here. Moreover, a couple of things about the Bible and ancient mores. We have to understand that under the ancient Near Eastern society, there was this very important concept called corporate responsibility or corporate solidarity. Sometimes many unbelievers will object to the notion of, for instance, the firstborn of Egypt dying for the misdeeds of Pharaoh, their king. And a skeptic will complain, why should the firstborn of children of Egypt die because of the deeds of a tyrannical ruler? Well, there are the words of a modern person living in comfort. Only people that live in comfort in our modern Western individualistic democratic society is going to think that way. But in the ancient Near East, corporate responsibility had a mirror image: corporate survival and economic viability. Ancient peoples lacked conveniences like automobiles, drugstores, personal firearms, and even in an urban setting, an extremely high degree of interdependence was required for pure survival. The ancient world was brutish and harsh, and the people depended upon their rulers for their very lives, and so they owed him their support. On the other hand, if your ruler or your father or your husband made a mistake, it was quite fair if you suffered in that ancient Near Eastern context, because you were truly interdependent with and seen to be in corporate solidarity with your head or your leader. Now that brings us to the issue of Deuteronomy 22 verses 28 and 29, this issue of statutory rape, or a woman who is pressured a virgin, an unengaged virgin who is pressured into having sexual relations with this man. Why does she end up marrying this one who took advantage of her, who violated her in this way, even though she was consensual? Why does she have to do that? Well, in order to understand the social context, it does a world of good. Now, somebody may object that the victim may not want to marry the rapist. Well, in modern times, that's a sensible objection, but for the ancients, you got to understand what we have in Deuteronomy 22, 28, 29 was a highly viable and merciful solution. In that ancient Near Eastern context, the victim, in other words, the one who was a virgin who lost their virginity outside of a marriage relationship, that individual would no longer be regarded as being able to marry, and thus would lose means of interdependent support. So she would be cast out in that ancient Near Eastern context because she lost her virginity. She'd be cast out of her family. Think Scarlet Letter. If you remember that movie that you probably had to watch in high school, think of that. This was a real problem in the ancient Near Eastern context. She would lose means not only of interdependent support from her immediate family and her community, because she brought shame upon her family, because she was consensual in this. Remember, the text says, and they are discovered, verse 28. It's not forcible rape. She was consensual. That family would be shamed, and so she would be cast out of this family. And so the rapist, the statutory rapist, the one who violated her, even though she was consensual, she took advantage of her, he is being required to provide that support through marriage, and therefore honor, this honor-shame culture, honor is maintained in her family, honor is maintained for her, and honor is maintained for his family. Okay? It's unlikely in that ancient Near Eastern social context that the victim would refuse that arrangement. Indeed, they might well demand it. Unlike our modern sentimentalities, this is not a matter of having the rapist be one's loving partner or cohort for further sexual relations or trysts. Now, second, a detractor might ask why the father gets the dowry or the money rather than the victim. Well, this is, again, related to what I just mentioned, another ancient Near Eastern practice known as the dowry. In the ancient Near East, when a married girl became part of a new family, she was also seen as a newly added asset to that corporate unit, that corporate solidarity that was there in that family unit, because more hands in the family meant more working skills, and more work, more productivity meant more survivability of that family unit, and ultimately that promoted the survivability of not only that family unit but also of the economic prosperity of the community. Remember, the concept of corporate solidarity is key here. Moreover, she now relies upon her new family for support, because without that, the woman would be destitute because she was unable to be married in that culture. She was considered to be a violated woman. She was considered to be taken advantage of in a statutory rape situation. It was a seduction situation, and so she would be destitute. Remember, there's no social security systems. There's no welfare systems. There's no food stamp systems. There's no Medicaid system in the ancient Near East. Secondly, the dowry was important because at the same time her new family received more hands for labor and survivability. Her former family lost that physical support and assistance in daily survival, but gains nothing in practical in return. And so the dowry provided that financial assistance to maybe help with support and the viability or the sustainability for the lost work that could be provided for that young lady. So the effect of the dowry was to make up for that loss of essential support for physical survival, for viability and community sustainability. And in light of what I'd mentioned above, that first item, payment to the father is quite fair, for it is his family. He's the head of that family. Remember, corporate solidarity, he's the head. And him being that corporate head of that family unit, he must now continue to support the girl for the rest of her life and bear the shame if the dowry is not given, and if the one who violated her and seduced her does not take her as his bride. And finally, and I think most importantly, the dowry represented, as Paul Copan says in his book, Is God a Moral Monster? It says, quote, "This represents the way that a young man showed his serious intentions toward his bride-to-be, and it was a way of bringing two families together in solidarity to discuss serious, holy, and a lifelong matter, namely that of marriage." So detractors, if they want to, they can rail about the unfairness of all this, but critics have no right whatsoever to make a moral judgment of any kind upon those whose situations are completely different than their own in their modern context, since they haven't lived in that context themselves. I mean, this is a classic example of the anachronistic fallacy, or what some logicians call chronological snobbery. So, I just wanted to point out that ancient Near Eastern context, because that's a game changer. Not only that, but the grammar that I've already discussed, the lexical issues with the three different Hebrew words that are used here, shows that the difference is you've got an adultery situation, verse 23 and 24. Verse 25 through 27 refers to a legitimate forcible rape situation where the one who raped the woman is put to death. And then you have verses 28 and following refers to a seduction, namely what we call in our modern context statutory rape. It's not forcible rape, this is a statutory rape. It says they both are discovered, and it's a different Hebrew word here. So this seduction of an unengaged woman, and so hopefully that discussion was helpful for those who have often wondered about what in the world is going on in this passage.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Dustin. And just so everybody knows, I have the Q&A app enabled if anyone wants to ask any questions, and I'll try and get to some of those if we have the chance to. But I think my cat's trying to cross the keyboard. Get back, Milo. But another thing, too, we hear it a lot. Our culture's progress beyond the ancient Eastern civilization. We're more civilized, and our laws are more reasonable. But most of the people who say things like that are people who accept evolution. But remember what the evolutionists often tell creationists whenever we talk about vestigial organs. Like Kent Hovind would always say, well, that's an example of losing something, not gaining something. So that's evolution gone backwards. And an atheist would say, well, no, there's no direction for evolution. Similarly, if someone says that, well, we've evolved and we're more civilized, remember, guys, according to the responses you get to creationists, there's no forward or backwards in evolution. That applies to morality. So I just wanted to bring that up because that's something that a lot of atheists will try and mention. And we know that a lot of them will try and appeal to evolution every chance they can. Before I go on to some of the philosophical nuances that Alex runs into when he talks about the foundation for moral values, Brenden, is there anything you want to add to what Dustin or I said?
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. That was really great to have all of that background there. Yeah, really well done. I wrote a blog yesterday to respond to all of this, and so I've been digging into it myself as well. And one of the things that I put on my website is the passage from 2 Samuel chapter 13, where Amnon rapes Tamar, and I'll just read a little bit of that. So 2 Samuel chapter 13 from verse 7, David sent word to Tamar at the palace, go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him. So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said. So everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food here into my bedroom so I may eat from your hand. And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister. When he says sister, that's his half-sister. That's my understanding. Don't, my brother, she said to him, don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you. But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, get up and get out. No, she said to him, sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you have already done to me. But he refused to listen to her. So that's a good example of just exactly what Dustin's been saying, of the cultural context back then being totally different from the cultural context of today. And I mean, it's not really very intellectually honest of Alex to say that the context is clear, it doesn't really matter, and all of that sort of thing. You know, whenever we read the Bible, we need to remember that it was written between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. Some of the passages even longer than that ago, and the cultural context is we've not just got the 2,000 or 3,000 year gap, but we've also got the different culture. It's a Middle Eastern culture. And here we are in our Western culture, and trying to understand the Bible, we need to understand those kind of contexts. Another thing is they didn't have a social welfare system back then. You know, most countries, if you for some reason, you know, you can't work or whatever due to illness or whatever the situation, you can usually get money from the government to help support you. But you know, back then they didn't have that kind of social welfare system, and especially if you got cast out of your family, that was your, as a woman, that was, you know, your way of being supported. So you know, that understanding those, it changes the whole understanding of the passage when we understand that.
Right, and if you apply Western context to an ancient piece of literature, you're not going to understand that piece of literature. Wouldn't it be absurd if Western historians try to apply that kind of context to, let's say, ancient Egypt?
Yeah.
You know, so anyone who, you know, like Alex, that says, well, the context is clear, you know, he didn't provide the context. He doesn't know the context. He may assert that he does, but it's just
prejudicial conjecture.
Right. It's just an arbitrary assertion and prejudicial conjecture. He doesn't know the context. I don't know if he even knows much of anything about Eastern civilization. And some people may say, well, you know, with the different cultural norms, that's an example of morals being relative. But that assumes that morals are grounded in human individuals. And actually, that kind of goes into what the next portion of it, which is a more philosophical portion, I suppose. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share again and play play another part of his video.
Can I jump in here for just a second, please? Just real quick. This issue of Amnon raping his half-sister Tamar, this was a clear violation of Deuteronomy 22, verse 25, this second case of forcible rape. And because the king found out about this, King David heard about these things, and he became very angry, according to 2 Samuel 13:21. But had he been consistent, had he been faithful totally to the Mosaic law, he should have had his son put to death. And he did not. And so what happened is Absalom was the one that actually became incensed at this. And he realized this was a violation of of course, he was wicked too, but he realized this was a violation of the law of Moses. And he says in verse 28, he says, when Amnon's heart's merry with wine, I say to you, strike Amnon and put him to death. He wanted to fulfill the Mosaic covenant. He was actually more righteous than even his own father, even in this sense. So I just want to point out that a lot of people say there's a lot of blood and murder and things going on. Yeah, I mean, this is the time you get to David and you get to his sons, you have a pretty screwed up situation with all the covenant curses that came down upon David's household for what he did with Bathsheba and having Uriah killed. And God told him, so look, the blood's never going to leave your house. And we have that being fulfilled here. But I just want to, you have a living example of Deuteronomy 22 taking place there in 2 Samuel 13. So I'm glad that Surfer Brenden brought that up, because you have an example of it not being fulfilled when it should be. So go ahead, Jason.
Can I just say one other thing is that there's no record in the Bible of anyone ever being put to death for adultery. And I think, you know, my understanding of part of the context too with the laws in the Old Testament is that they were with the death penalty, and that they were the maximum possible sentences and that my understanding is that they were not always intended to be carried out in a hyper-literal way.
That's correct.
And one of the examples that I've included in my blog post on this is that David committed adultery with Bathsheba. God didn't put him to death, obviously God condemned what he did, but he was, in the New Testament, God struck Ananias and Sapphira, to death for lying, so God could have struck David down and killed him, and he was in the position of being king. I think that's another important thing to realize, or to be aware of. That's a possibility that helps to understand the context better. And I wonder too, if the woman said, no, I don't want to be married to this guy who's raped me, I think that they would take that into account, and they would say, well,
yes,
okay, if you don't want to be married to him, but usually they would because of the cultural context. But if they had not wanted to, then I believe that they wouldn't have been forced. Like Alex is making it sound like, oh, she's got no choice in the matter. I don't believe
that is correct. The father was the one that would make the ultimate decision, as he was the head of the family. But the records show, based upon the commentaries that I've read on this issue, that the daughter would certainly have input on this, and if she did not want to marry him, she did not absolutely. It was not an. This is not this is case law. Case law is not to be taken in absolute fashion, as you've already noted. It's supposed to give you examples of if this, then this. Okay, and so, but you have to look at each individual context, just as we do today in our modern case law, our modern litigation in our Western cultures, and in this context, all of this information was taken into consideration by the father, and so the woman did have a say-so in whether she would get to marry. But the problem with that is, because the ancient Near Eastern honor and shame context, as you hinted at earlier, she probably would have married him. She probably would have wanted to marry this guy, because it didn't have anything to do with, some type of romantic lust or anything of that nature. This had to do with maintaining honor for the community and continuing to be both a viable economic, as well as from just a pure physical survival standpoint. If you lost honor in your community, you were not able to be married in this context. If you couldn't get married, you would bring shame upon your family if the father continued to provide for you. You continue to live with that family, because remember, this is consensual. This is statutory rape. This isn't forcible rape. This is seduction. So in this context, we have a situation where you brought shame upon your family. So in order to maintain the honor, you're going to want to maintain that by marrying this guy, and then you're going to demand, because you were taken advantage of, you're going to demand that he do it. Now, I know that's totally foreign to modern ears. I get that. But you cannot take your modern sensibility, your modern mores about an individualistic Western society and try to read that back into an ancient Near Eastern corporate solidarity type of culture. It's just not going to work.
Yep, historians don't do it, and neither should atheists. So if they want to be academic and scholarly and rational, then they shouldn't do that kind of thing. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and play the next part where he goes into how he explained his morals, and some things he's going to say is going to have some rather interesting philosophical implications. So let me go ahead and screen share again and play that other part.
Instead, tried to shift the burden by insisting that I tell him how I account for morality. As I've pointed out in the comments to YouTube, that's a little bit like a mechanic failing to fix my car,
Whoops. You might need to skip ahead on the video.
I do think
I'm stopping it there, sorry.
I was actually about to stop it, so that was a little convenient. I'm going to get right back to about where he was. I think we're about 3:16 or something, but I'm going to go ahead and address something that he said. Brenden, whenever I know that presuppositionalists typically do this. Whenever he brought up these things to you, you rightfully pointed out, well, I mean, if you're going to try and point out some sort of contradiction in the morality in Scripture, then certainly you ought to be able to give some sort of coherent, rational, logical explanation for why there's anything that is morally binding in your worldview. You know, the term objective moral values, and I don't know how you two feel about this, I do not like that term at all. Objective morals. Do either of you guys share the same sentiment that I do on that?
What do you mean by that?
By objective moral values, typically objective moral values means that moral values exist independently of opinion. You know, and by of opinion, you know, it can be interpreted by some skeptics to mean mind independent. Right. Which would and then entail an independence of morality from God himself.
Yeah, and then they try to bring the Euthyphro's dilemma into the...
Right, so I don't like the term objective moral values, and also I find that some Christian apologists, when they use that term, are very slippery with it. They sort of equivocate it in some instances, and sometimes they'll go between epistemological morals and you know, like the epistemology of moral values, and then slip into the metaphysical moral values when they get cornered. I've seen it happen with some classical apologists. So I think the term is confusing. It leads to semantic issues. I don't really think that Christians should use that term. But let's talk about the analogy that Alex gave concerning the mechanic.
Let me jump in here for just a second with that. I've actually debated this issue with Alex, and anytime I used those statements, if I said objective moral values, I always defined what I meant by that. By objective, I meant external to human minds.
Right.
So what I would say in that regard, and then of course moral values, that's not a problem, but I always used objective. A lot of times when Christian apologists use the word objective, they mean absolute. In other words, this is true for all people, all places, and all times. Well, I don't think the laws in Deuteronomy 22 are absolutely true in the sense of being applicable to all believers throughout all places and all times. So I'm very careful to if I'm going to use the word objective moral values, I'm very careful to delineate what I mean by objective. What I mean is I tell them it's external to our minds. So it is external to our minds. They'll say, well, is it external to the mind of God? I said, no, it is subjective to his mind. But because God's mind is universal, God's subjective values regarding ethics are universally binding.
Right, and I actually
at any one particular given point in time. So that's the statement I use, and I haven't found any problems with that thus far. But I just want to throw that in there, just as a way to help.
I want to try and get into that a little bit later in the video too, and kind of flesh it out, because there are some nuances that I think that some people need to understand. But that's absolutely true, Dustin, because the Bible doesn't teach that moral values are independent of God.
Right.
But be that as it may, though, the analogy that Alex used with the car mechanic that messes up the car further, and someone maybe like Alex goes to the mechanic, said, "What did you do to the car?" And then the mechanic says, "I'm not going to tell you until you tell me how you can fix this problem." Well, there's a couple of problems with that analogy. First off, mechanics usually use inductive reasoning whenever they're repairing cars. They say, well, this may be the problem, so let's try and replace this and see if it works. So there's not really like an absolute standard of how one ought to fix a car. There's a lot of ways to diagnose cars, and sometimes you may get the wrong diagnosis and have to try it a different way. Not to mention the person who asked, "What'd you do to the car to mess it up?" The person paid the mechanic to fix the car. So when the mechanic messes it up further, the person has a right to say, "Hey, you messed this up. I don't think I should have to pay for this because you made it worse." For instance, I took my 91 Mazda Miata. I was getting an engine swap on it, and I came to a shop that was working on it, and I come and I look in that thing, and the shifter was broken. They broke the shifter. And they weren't wanting to pay to fix it. So I raised Cain, in typical Christ-like fashion. I'm just throwing that out. I'm just kidding. But I rose Cain, and they ended up correcting the problem for me. So when you pay for someone for a service, and then they make something worse, then that obviously raises some questions. It's not like that with God. God's not providing us a service. God's not offering to fix our car.
Alex is not paying us either.
What's that?
Alex isn't paying us.
Yeah. So there's some differences in the context. So we're talking about ultimate standards for morality, and there's no ultimate standards within the situation with the mechanic being able to fix the car, or not be able to fix the car. So if someone doesn't have a standard for morality, then there's no reason to there's no reason for them to really object to anything. It can only be a matter of opinion. And I do believe Alex has admitted that and I don't know if he'd even use the word admitted. Maybe he'd say he proclaims that morality is subjective, and he doesn't seem to have a problem embracing that philosophy. But if he's going to say morals are objective, he does have to be consistent. He did eventually
actually say that objective morality does not exist.
Yeah, so there's no reason to fault someone. I mean, according to his worldview, everyone's just acting according to their evolutionary tendencies. What fault is it of Israel if he doesn't agree with the laws that Israel had? They're just acting in accordance with the process of evolution.
Well, I don't like butter pecan ice cream. So what he's basically done is he's equated moral truth with ice cream flavors. In other words, just mere relativistic subjective opinion. But we all know, and he knows this too in his heart of hearts, that moral truth, when it comes to issues like this, moral truth's not equivalent to or likened unto ice cream flavors. It's equivalent to insulin. You have to have it to live. If you don't have it, you're going to die.
Right.
And so truth is not like ice cream. Moral truth is not like ice cream.
But
moral
whenever you
truth is like
subjectivism, it is like ice cream.
Yeah, it is. But the problem is, as you noted, he can't live consistently with his own worldview. And so he's going to complain. I mean, I'm sure he watches this video. He's going to complain about some of the answers that we gave. They were either inconsistent, or that some of the things that you said maybe misrepresented what he was saying, or whatever that may be. But who cares in an atheistic worldview where you and I are just evolved biological bags of matter?
Right. According to his worldview, I had no obligation to correctly represent his viewpoint. And ironically, Lynn and I had a conversation about his coming out as Satan atheist and then retracting it later on, saying basically, that was a lie, and you're always telling creationists they're liars, and here you are, telling a fib over YouTube. And then he took the video and took a bunch of Lynn's comments out of context and then played mine when I was talking about Alex and making it look like it applied to Tim and Lynn from the Bible Thumping Wingnut podcast. Today, in the past day or so, Tim has 2 videos about all the times that Alex has contradicted himself just in the past few days. And then Alex releases about a minute-long video saying, if you see a lot of cuts and stuff, then you might want to be wary of the video because someone's probably being taken out of context. So it made me think. I said, I wonder, then I guess I should be wary of that video where he took a bunch of cuts of Lynn and I talking. So there's no consistency here. There's no, there's just hypocrisy.
Can I say something?
Sure.
So Alex responded on my blog, and part of his response to me is just ridiculous. And I'll read just part of it. He says, "As for your God being subjective in his moral decrees, for morality to be truly subjective, it must be utterly mind-independent. If it comes from the mind of your God, then it is by definition subjective. So you must either accept that your God is not the source of morality, or accept that your God's morality is subjective, which will no doubt cause you a huge problem, as your whole precept garbage depends on making claims that subjective isn't good enough."
Okay, there's so many non sequiturs in that. I don't even know where to begin.
Well, I'll tell you this.
And then
how is it that the idea that yeah, of course, I mean every moral view that I have that's in my mind is subjective to me because it's in my mind. Nobody's denying that. How is it the case that because God's ideas about morality in any particular era of redemptive history are subjective to his own mind? In other words, it's a first-person experience in his own mind. How is it the case then that that doesn't apply to us, especially since God's mind's universal? Lay out that argument for me, Alex. That's what I've asked him to do, and he won't do it. When I've interacted with him on Google Plus about the issue of abortion, we got to this issue, and I kept bringing him back to this and bringing him back to this, and I said, show me, lay out the argument. Don't just assert it. Don't just assert that we don't have any an objective basis for ethics under the New Covenant era, because God's ideas of ethics in his mind are subjected to him. In other words, he has a first-person experience of his own standards for ethics. Therefore, that means that now we don't have an experience, or we're not obligated to follow those objective decrees given to us by God in the New Testament era. Give me that argument, Alex. And he won't do it. And I think he won't do it because he can't. All he can do is make a bare naked assertion.
Yeah, and there's no, and really, you know, from an atheist standpoint, there's no way to prove that objective moral values must necessarily be mind independent. How is anybody going to prove that?
You can't. You have to have a decree from God.
Right, and you know, and since Alex always says he operates off the basis of evidence, I'm just curious as to what evidence he has that in order for morality to be binding to us, that it has to be independent of God's mind. That's just silly. How can he get any less subjective than the God of Christianity? You know, Hebrews 6:13 says that God had to swear by himself because there was no higher authority that he could swear by. And you also have 1 Samuel 2:3 that says all moral actions and deeds are weighed by God. So what is the source of morality? The God of Scripture. You can't, and the God of Scripture has to be the creator of all things. How can you get any less subjective than not only the ultimate authority of the universe, but the one that the universe owes its existence to? How can you get any less arbitrary than that? If that is not objective, then no other authority can be.
Well, he's reducing God down to a human level. You know, he's making it sound like God is just, you know, making mistakes all the time and doesn't know what he's doing.
That's reading his
just ridiculous
definitions into Scripture,
Yep.
and that's what he's doing.
Then another professed atheist commented underneath that and re-quoted what, you know, copied and pasted what Alex had said and said, "Dang, I was going to say that. Oh wow, that's really good stuff." You know, so what?
My goodness.
Yeah, you
see, what nonsense.
And some of these, and I'm not going to say, I've met some very intelligent atheists. I met 2 of them in the past 2 days, actually. And at least, actually, 3 of them in the past 2 days. I'd be honest, that's not something I'm used to. Because a lot of the atheists I run into are sort of shallow, Doc and Knight, Hitchens variety of atheists.
Yes.
You know, and it's just, and I wish that you know, and some of the more intellectual atheists will call out some of the new atheist crowd on all the mistakes they make in logic. I mean, you can't wave the banner of reason if you're not reasonable.
Jason, you and I have excellent conversations on Facebook with several very intelligent and reasonable atheists. I have excellent conversations with them. I don't ever have any problems like this with them. We get to a point in a conversation where we realize we've got an issue that either gets down to some type of presuppositional tension or some type of inconsistency in their worldview, and they will admit either they don't have an answer for it or they just kind of skirt the issue. And we'll bring them back to that, and we do it in a charitable way. Why? Because they're being intellectually honest. That's the way I'd like to see these types of conversations go. But they don't go that way because once you start to bring out, say, for instance, Hume's guillotine, which is completely devastating to any secular view of ethics.
Oh, absolutely.
Hume's guillotine basically says you cannot get an ought from an is. That's also known as the naturalistic fallacy, which was coined by philosopher G. Moore. You cannot get an ought from an is. What is the case does not necessarily tell you what should be the case. You can't do that. You'll never be able to do that. The only way that you can know what you ought be doing is if a universal, transcendent, divine mind reveals that information to you such that you can know it sufficiently. And the only way we can have that is through the Word of God. Other than that, it's just subjective, relativistic opinion.
I was having a conversation with Trolling with Reason on one of Tim's videos.
What's with that name? I mean,
I don't know. I already suggested to him that he change his name upon our conversation to just Trolling, you know, or something like that. But you know, he started asking me, you know, are the laws of nature binding? And I said, no, they can't be binding. They're just a description. They're just descriptive laws that scientists have chosen to explain how the universe works. There's nothing binding about them. You know, so whereas moral laws and the laws of logic are binding laws. You ought to do this. You ought to do that. You ought to think this way. You ought not commit the asserting the consequent fallacy. You ought not violate the law of contradiction. You know, these are prescriptive laws, but the laws of nature aren't prescriptive. So that, you know, and I guess I don't know if Trolling with Reason was actually trying to argue that we ought to follow the laws of nature.
Yeah, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, how do you?
It's really a tautology.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, how do you get from the metaphysical inevitability or the obvious metaphysical situation that we're all in, namely that we all are sitting here, right? So we're all subjected to gravity. How do you get from that to should we follow the laws of nature? I mean, did you understand him to be saying that there's some type of moral prescription to the laws of nature? I mean, how does that make sense?
I'm not going to be that uncharitable. I'm going to give him a benefit of a doubt. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to be uncharitable to him. You know, I don't want to misrepresent him or anything. But it seemed like he might be going that direction. But like I said, I'm going to give him a benefit of a doubt and assume that he's not going to say something that nonsensical. But there is an issue though whenever you contrast the laws of nature with the laws of morality or the laws of logic. I'm sure Dustin, you're probably familiar with Platonic realism.
Yes.
There's a problem with universals where you can't get a universal conclusion from an experience, and the laws of nature are not a priori concepts that we are aware of prior to our experiences. The laws of nature are you know, or at least our conception of how the universe works is developed through experience.
Yeah, they're discursive.
Right. So if it's developed through experience, then the laws of nature cannot be considered logically to be universal.
Mm-hmm.
So the laws of nature, by definition, cannot be binding because if they're binding, they have to be universal. If they don't apply in every case, they're not truly prescriptive. They're more or less case laws.
Right. Yeah, they're just as you said earlier. They're just descriptions of the way the world works, as best we're able to formulate it right now, given the limited amount of knowledge that we have.
Right. So, anyways, I thought that would be something interesting to cover too. I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next part of Alex's video, and hopefully another error won't occur. But if it does occur at a convenient time again, I'm okay with that. Let's see. Is this the one? I don't know. Let me check. Whoa, check that out. That is awesome. I think I clicked on the wrong screen.
To infinity and beyond.
Oh, yeah.
All right, there we go. Can you guys see it?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I don't know how. I'm a noob to this stuff. I don't know how this stuff works. So.
And which I'm guessing some of my creationist friends won't, means it's sentient and self-aware.
Oh, I think we're too far. Let me go back some.
Failing to fix my car, breaking it further, and then when asked, "What have you done to it?" saying, "Well, I'm not going to tell you until you can account until you can account for how you would fix the car." It's nonsense, and it's just diversion. Anyway, in the interest of trying to get this conversation to move forward, I have answered Brendan's ridiculous challenges. And I have done this before in videos. This is something I've done before, but I'm going to just read what I've said rather than try and kind of come up with it again. I'll read back what I said to explain how I view morality, because I think it's important. I did point out that my position is entirely irrelevant to whether Sir Brenden can defend his position. Okay, so this is what I've written. This is in the comments on my initial video to Sir Brenden. I said, I believe slavery... I'll start again. Now, slavery was mentioned in this, which is why the word slavery whooped out of my mouth. I believe rape and slavery to be wrong because it removes the agency from another sapient entity. Now, sapient, for any of you who don't understand, which I'm guessing some of my creationist friends won't, means it's sentient and self-aware and able to express that. So human beings are sapient. My cat is sentient. She is aware of herself. She is aware of existence, but she may not be sapient. Okay. So, I believe rape and slavery to be wrong because it removes the agency from another sapient entity. Evolution has furnished us with self-awareness and empathy, so we can recognize that we don't like certain things to happen to us. Pretty much all of those things that remove our agency. murder, rape, theft, etc. To rape somebody does no good to them. And what is good?
Okay, if you guys don't mind, I want to just tackle this first, because I already know exactly what I'm going to say after I get the infinite hallway gone.
It's the infinite regress. That's what happens when you reject God.
Yeah. There's a example of infinite regress right there, as far as the eye can see, at least. A couple of things. First, Alex says that according to his worldview, rape and slavery is wrong because it removes agency, which agency means, someone's control of the situation. My question is, whose agency? Did we wrong Hitler by stopping him in World War II and in the Holocaust? Did we wrong him by when we stop a dictator like Saddam Hussein, for instance? Did we wrong him by stopping him from being able to rule the country? Whose agency? How do we determine whose agency should be stopped in a moral sense, and whose agency should continue? When we put someone in jail for something that for breaking the law, we're removing their agency. They're not able to go out and do whatever they want anymore. They're put in jail. Does that make putting people in jail immoral? So just simply saying removing agency makes slavery and rape wrong. It's whenever you try and define it that way, it just leads to these absurdities. What about this situation? About whose agency? Whose agency should we remove in a situation where there is something immoral going on? He's talked about evolution too, and how we've developed empathy. How we developed empathy through evolution. I've heard this before. Let's give a situation that's a little bit more complicated and not so black and white to illustrate a point that I have against this sort of hypothesis for determining what's moral and what's not. Let's say you have a company, and you have a fairly high level executive in the company that is black, but the rest of the executives are white. And they signed a contract with him, and it was in writing. And they end up burning the contracts, and they kick him out because it turned out that they were just using him. He was, they're all racist, and they didn't want him to take a part of the profits after he'd done all the work, and he had no way to prove that they actually signed a contract. All right, and let's suppose I'm standing by a building, and there's a police officer close to me as well, one day, and then the building has to be empty, and all you have are the executives that basically messed this guy over. And you see this guy drive up in a truck, run up to the building, and put a suitcase that's a bomb right by the building. Obviously an act of retribution for the wrongs that had been done to him. So what do I do? Do I tell the police officer so that he'll stop the men from bombing the building and killing all the crooked executives inside who not only maybe to add to it, not even messed over the executive, but also repeatedly other people as well. And big ones like that can affect a lot of people. So what do we? Do I just think, well, you know what? If that building's bombed and those executives are killed, there's going to be a lot of people that would have been ripped off in the future that aren't going to be ripped off now. But then what about the families of the executives? Do I empathize with the executives and their families and say, we really a life shouldn't be lost over this? And I tell a police officer. So the question is who do I empathize with, and what standard do I use to empathize? Decide who I'm going to empathize with. So there's still a question of a standard. You may say that, well, removing agency from a person is immoral, but certainly a lot of the punishments we have for immorality is removing agency from people for breaking laws and whatnot. So is putting people in jail which takes away their agency. Is that immoral? According to Alex's definition, it is.
Mm.
And that's just a few. There's more problems than that. That's just a couple of the big ones. With him talking about removing agency and empathizing with people. So we still have to have a standard of how we know who to empathize with. Do we emphasize, and even in the situation, do we empathize with the victim, or do we empathize with the criminal? And he may say, well, if the criminal is breaking a civil law, then we should empathize with the victim. But what if the laws were different? What if someone was beating their wife, but it turns out they're in a Muslim country where they're able to do that? Who do we empathize with? Do we follow the laws of the Islamic country, or do we apply Western standards to it? And if we apply Western standards to it, what makes it better? The Western standards better than the Islamic standards.
That's right.
So, and he may say again, well, we're taking away someone's agency. Well, we're also taking away the agency of the guy in his own country that actually has that sort of situation as one that he's in his legal right. So either way, you're going to take away somebody's agency. So what kind of situation is it warrants taking away agency from somebody, and what kind of situation does not warrant taking agency away from somebody? So we have all of these questions that we need a standard for that simply saying, well, removing agency is wrong does not answer. Is there anything else you guys want to add to that?
I was just going to say this is the problem with social contract theory.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a universal transcendent standard of morality that exists outside of all people, to which all men ought be subject to, then you don't have any basis upon which to look at either another society in your modern era, or in this context, an ancient Israelite society, and say, well, that's just absolutely wrong. No, it can't be absolutely wrong. There's no universal objective standard that you could appeal to say that anything's wrong, because there is no wrong. It's just your opinion. It's like butter pecan. It's like ice cream flavors.
Right.
See, the fact that this issue comes up shows that in his heart of hearts, as with nearly every other human being, especially those that are not epistemologically self-aware or ethically self-aware of the problems with their system, this shows the problems. I mean, this exposes the internal inconsistency. This exposes the presuppositions that don't comport with each other.
Right. One other thing I want to add to for clarification, for anyone who still tries to insist the agency objection, if you have a situation where a Muslim is beating his wife, which is consistent with Sharia law, and we have a country that does support Sharia law, you have one person telling someone they shouldn't beat their wife, whenever all these people decided on Sharia law in the country, billions of people. So by trying to stop someone from taking away one woman's agency, you are infringing on a bunch of billions of people's agencies in that instance.
That's right.
So that's to kind of articulate what I was saying earlier, in case that wasn't clear. Because as far as I'm concerned, and I would argue as far as logic is concerned, that completely shuts down the agency distinction that Alex and other atheists have tried to make in the past. Obviously, this sort of appeal to agency is not anything new in philosophy. That idea has been around for years.
Well, when you use what you just did, is you used Hume's guillotine against it. It's irrelevant. It makes the issue of whether whether an organism is so-called sentient or sapient, all that becomes moot when you get to the issue of the fact that, okay, you don't have any transcendent standard by which to judge anything as right or wrong, and so the issue of sapient versus sentient, all of those things become moot. It's just moot. It's like when somebody tries to debate the issue of homosexuality. Is homosexuality right or wrong? Is it in the genes? Is it in the DNA? It's irrelevant. It's ultimately irrelevant because Romans 1 says it's irrelevant.
Yeah, and before somebody tries to strawman me and say, oh, well, Jason is advocating wife beating in a Muslim country, which I would not doubt anyone would try and do, and may even still try and do after I clarify this. What I'm showing is that Alex's standard of morality is going to lead to moral conclusions that he does not agree with if he takes it to its logical conclusion. As a Christian, I don't advocate wife beating in an Islamic country. So So for anybody that might want to try, who thinks that they want to try and misrepresent me, you just let the record stand. I'm against that.
Yeah, we don't advocate wife beating or beating people in any country.
Right.
So we advocate loving your wives the way that Christ loved the church and gave himself up for it. Loving your wives, demonstrating self-sacrificial love for them in such a way that they're going to know that you care for them because you're demonstrating the love of Christ to them. That is.
Isn't there a passage in 1 Corinthians 5 about loving your wife as Christ loves the church?
It's Ephesians 5.
It's Ephesians 5. Thank you. I knew it was that, either 1 Corinthians 5 or Ephesians 5. I couldn't remember.
Yep.
All right. I'm gonna go ahead and move on because we've been here for about an hour, and let's try and finish the video, and we'll just wrap it up. Because I think we covered most of what he said already before we even finish it. So. No infinite regress this time.
In my worldview, good is whatever helps others to do things that do not remove the agency of others, and what is harm/bad, that which denies the agency of others. Now, the agency is the ability of an entity to act.
Another error occurred. Let me try and pull it up again. Is it still on screen share or not?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I can see it. We can see it on the screen.
Okay. I can't remember. I think it was about 4 minutes mark. I think something like that. Let's see here.
Recognise that we don't like certain things to happen to us of existence, but she may not be sapient. Okay. So, I believe rape and slavery to be wrong because it removes the agency from another sapient entity. Evolution has furnished us with self-awareness and empathy, so we can recognise that we don't like certain things to happen to us. Pretty much all of those things that remove our agency. Murder, rape, theft, etc. To rape somebody does no good to them. And what is good? In my worldview, good is whatever helps others to do things that do not remove the agency of others. And what is harm/bad? That which denies the agency of others. Now, the agency is the ability of an entity to act under its own autonomy. I judge that which is moral as that which maximizes good whilst minimizing harm. So I would take up arms against the Nazis in World War II as, despite having to kill others, in doing so, therefore removing their agency, I would be doing that which maximized the good for the maximum amount of people. As in, given my account, I can clearly see that the passages in Deuteronomy remove the agency of the rape victim, not once, but twice. The first time when she is raped, the second time when she is forced to marry her rapist or executed. So, there's my response. Now, Surfer Brenden came back saying, you've still not answered the question. The question is not whether you think rape is wrong. No, actually, the question is, Brenden, how do you justify the Bible's comments about rape? It's nothing to do with me. You've completely flipped this to try and make it questions about me. Nice dodge. You've said here, you've still not answered the question. The question is not whether you think rape is wrong. The question is, do you think rape is objectively morally wrong? My response here is, there is no such thing as objective morality, because I do not believe there is. Objective morality would have to exist outside of minds, and it would have to be true for all people at all times, in all places. Even if your God existed, it would have to be true for him. He would have to be beholden to it for it to be objective morality. If he is the source of morality, then it is his subjective morality. This isn't difficult. If you want to believe in objective morality, Brenden, and the rest of you God botherers, you have to accept that God is beholden to it and not the source of it. If God is the source of the morality, then it is his subjective morality, or as you like to put it, his opinion. So I've answered these questions now, Brenden. I would very much appreciate it if you, and not one of your little trolls, I want you to do it, will explain why it is morally right for a rape victim to be forced to marry her rapist, or for her to be stoned to death if she doesn't cry out whilst being raped in the city. Thanks. Look forward to your answer.
You know, if I am going to be called a troll, I hope that I'm a battle troll. You guys remember those battle troll toys that came out in the 90s? I don't know if anybody else. When I was a kid, I had a battle troll.
I was driving, Dan, man.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, when I was little, these battle troll toys came out, and you know, and you got the little sissy girl toy trolls, you know, that had the diamond belly buttons and whatnot. But if I, you know, if I want to be a troll, I want to be a battle troll. I want to be one of those ones in armor and have swords and stuff like that. That would be awesome.
Yep. You want to troll? You want to troll with an axe and with reason, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Theonomic trolling.
I'm not the honest.
I know, I'm just joking. It's a joke. It's a joke.
Yeah. Well. Anyway, though. But a couple of things. We've already addressed a lot of things he brought up about the Let me get out. I don't know how the heck I'm gonna. Why is it not closing? I don't understand. Maybe do this. Click twice. Close it out. Okay, there we go. All right.
Okay.
Good enough. Yeah, I still haven't figured this stuff out yet. But you know, we've responded a lot. You know, he referred to Deuteronomy 22. Both Brenden and Dustin have already knocked that out. So we don't need to refer to that. But there is something of interest that he did mention, and that is the idea that we should do what's best for everybody. That being said, there's a couple of moral questions that are raised from a statement like that. First off, how can one prove what's morally best for everybody? How would one be able to prove that? How could one interview everybody and see? Because, you know, a lot of people have different opinions on what's moral and what's not moral. I've heard somebody suggest, well, why didn't God create the best possible world? Why didn't he create a world where there's suffering? Why didn't he create a better world? Well, for some people, a better world would be something like Dragon Ball Z or Naruto, where there obviously is pain and suffering, but a lot of superpowers and cool karate stuff, and, you know, and kaiokening and stuff. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about.
Not really.
Okay, well, it's an anime where there's a lot of fighting and whatnot, and some people wish that the world was like that. So not everybody desires a world that's actually completely void of suffering. So you'll find different opinions on how the world ought to be. Similarly, you'll find opinions on what's moral and what's not moral between different people. Some people believe that gay marriage should be completely banned. Others believe that it should be legalized and that people should accept it. So we have all these different moral indifferences, and how do we decide who's right and who's wrong? And how do we decide what will give the most good, in Alice's definition, to people? Now, there is a problem, and what Alex is doing is he's committing the fallacy of equivocation. Mm-hmm. He's taking the moral good, and he said, well, what's morally good is that which is good for others. Now, when he says good for others, that's not a moral good. That's a practical good.
Right. That's
like saying, like, that guy's pretty good at playing chess, or that's a good team. You know, in those contexts, it's obviously good is not used in a moral sense. Similarly, Alex is not using it in a moral sense in the context of saying that which is good is what's good for the most amount of people. Question becomes, what is good? And we already showed how the agency, the addition of the agency distinction does not solve that problem, and it leads to conclusions that Alex would probably disagree with morally. So, but there's another problem too, and this one I find to be kind of humorous in a way. So we're supposed to do that which is the best for the most amount of people. Does that mean that if I choose to have a career as a janitor, that I'm being immoral because I could have been a heart surgeon, or I could have been a philanthropist, or maybe I'd be like a stockholder, or maybe I would just leech off of Social Security in the United States? Is that, you know, I mean, all these things, you know, if I could be doing something that does something better for someone else, like saving lives. You know, I could work in a cancer center and do operations to remove cancer. I'd be saving lives every time I go in the room to do surgery. Or I could be a secretary for like a you know, an attorney or something. So that which is moral is what causes the most amount of good for the most amount of individuals. So now what you choose as a career is a moral obligation. So that is a big problem for that kind of thinking. Does anybody else have anything they want to add about that?
Yeah, if I could jump in there. I mean, that's the biggest weakness in his whole argument, is that how does one without God? How does one determine what is good and what's not good? It's very subjective. I heard an analogy a while ago where I was saying, when you see two people and they're in love, and you can, for everyone else is saying, don't marry this guy, he's a criminal or whatever, and the girl's saying, oh, but I love him so much. How could something that feels so right be wrong? Well, that's the kind of absurd situation that Alex's worldview is reduced to. There is no way to determine what is good, what is causing the maximum amount of good, without having an ultimate standard. So in my blog, I'll just quickly read the paragraph that I've written in response to that. As for Alex's explanation of morality being whatever causes the most good and least harm for people, it is totally begging the question, who decides what is causing the most good? A rapist could argue that the most good is being caused when he rapes women because he's spreading his superior genes, and Alex would have no real grounds for any rational objection to that because he doesn't believe in objective morality. I'm sure that he'd say that nearly everyone agrees that rape is wrong, but so what? This is the fallacy of the appeal to the majority. Majority opinion does not determine right or wrong. If the majority of Germans supported Hitler's regime, would that make it right? If the majority of people profess to believe that God exists, would that then prove that God exists? Alex says he would have fought against the Germans in World War II, but upon what basis does he know that Hitler was wrong in what he was doing? Hitler would argue that in the long term his regime would bring about the least suffering for people by wiping out the weak. Isn't that what evolution teaches is the way to advance evolution? And of course Alex's response to that was the typical, you don't understand evolution. Come on.
Yeah, there's no forward or backwards in evolution, so if Alex is going to insinuate as such, then he doesn't understand evolution anyway.
Let me jump in here for just a second. He said that, we've already quoted this a couple times, that he thinks that his moral standards basically that what minimizes harm and brings about the maximal good for the most number of people. Well, let me ask this. What about Sharia law? I mean, the Muslims in Saudi Arabia think that they're instituting Sharia law throughout that land brings about the maximum good for the most number of people, and it minimizes harm, right? So they're fulfilling his standard.
Right.
So, and what about the Nazis? The Nazis thought that the ethnic cleansing that they engaged in of those that they thought were inferior non-human species, namely from Jews all the way down to African Americans and gypsies, etc., they thought that the elimination of those people would help foster a strong race, namely the superiority of the Aryan race, and would make the world a better place. So what objective basis does he have to object to the Nazis in creating their own moral standards in this regard, especially since they too agreed that the maximal good for the most number of people, the way to minimize harm and bring about the greatest benefit to all of human society is to get rid of these particular, what they determined to be miscreants in humanity.
Right.
I mean, he said objective morality must exist outside of minds. He also said there is no objective morality. So if there's no objective morality, and if objective morality must exist outside of a mind, then how do we know whether the maximal good for the most number of people itself is a standard I should believe in? Is that relative to? Right. How do we know? How do we know that? If it exists outside of minds, then how can we know that that proposition itself exists outside? It exists. I mean, how are you going to know that objective morality must exist only if it exists outside of a mind if you cannot think about that in your mind? It's a ridiculous statement. It's a self-referentially absurd statement. And then I want to ask him if there are no objective moral standards, then is his standard, namely that what constitutes good ethics is the maximal good for the most number of people and minimizing harm, is that itself an objective moral standard? So this is all self-referentially incoherent. And I'm not trying to be mean with a guy. I want the guy to think about these things and think deeply about them and realize, as several nihilistic atheistic philosophers have come just right out and said, you cannot have moral values, transcendent moral values, without God. You cannot have them. I've got a book that's on my phone. You can get it for, check this, $6.66 on Amazon.com. It's called Neo-Nihilism by Peter Sosjet H. I recommend every Christian and every atheist read that book. It's written by an atheist philosophy professor. And he says several times in his book, you do not get objective, transcendent moral values apart from God. He says, but there's no God, therefore we don't have any objective morality. And so everything's just a crapshoot. Well, of course, we know that's all nonsense too, because then he goes on in his book and he argues that people ought not think this way. Atheists ought not use secular ethics and think this way because this is incorrect. Well, all the while he's assuming that the logic's incorrect. They ought to think rationally. Where do you get ought from in a world where there is no God? He himself says you can't do it. So again, another example of a very smart, intelligent man that ultimately his argument ends up being self-referentially incoherent. It ends up being self-defeating, because when you don't start with God as the necessary foundation for morality, you don't have morality. You don't have a basis for being rational. You don't even have a basis for critiquing anything that we've said in this hangout tonight. It's just your mere relativistic opinion.
Right.
And this has a lot of social consequences, you know, like eugenics, abortion, you know, all sorts of
cannibalism.
social consequences.
Yeah, cannibalism,
That's a good example.
serial killing. I mean, if what brings about the maximal good for the most number of people, why should I accept that? Why should I arbitrarily accept that standard? If there's no objective standard of morality, there's no transcendent good that exists in the mind of God outside of us to which we are to submit, then why should I submit to your idea, sir, that the maximal good for the most number of people is the standard now? Why can't I say that the maximal good for me to fulfill my desires, as I am the God of my own universe, and therefore I can eat the brains of young men that I capture and bring into my hotel room? That's what Jeffrey Dahmer did. I'm not advocating that. I think that's evil. I think that's wicked. But I have a standard that exists outside of me that's irrelevant to what I think about it, that tells me that this is evil. And that's a standard that exists outside of my mind. It's a standard that exists in the universal mind, namely the mind of God. And we all submit to that.
That I have. Am I morally obligated to invite Alex to this hangout?
No.
By his standard, I'm not. But another thing too. Here's an interesting question: Is it the conclusion of the efforts that makes it immoral, or is it the intentions behind the efforts that makes it moral? In altruism, it does seem that the intention behind the method is what makes it moral, and not the actual conclusion. So your example, Dustin, of Sharia law was spot on, because the intentions behind it is to try and make the world a better place.
Yep, according to the Muslim worldview, that's right. According to the Muslim worldview, this is how they understand the world is going to be a better place. According to the Nazi mentality during the Third Reich, this is how they understood that the world is going to be a better place. According to these people, they thought this is what's going to make society better worldwide. According to Emperor Hirohito, if we take over the Pacific Rim and we begin to take over the whole world, this is going to make the world a better place. We bring everybody up under the ideals of some type of modern form of the Bushido Code. I mean, this is, again, if you don't have God, if you don't start with God as the necessary foundation for your moral standards, you don't have any moral standards.
Right. And another thing I guess I wanted to touch on too, concerning what I had just brought up. I said that basically, with altruism, it seems, and with any subjective morality, it appears that the intentions behind it is what makes it moral, not really the conclusion. Of course, you can't know what the future holds as a human. We're not omniscient in that sense. But with God, with the God of Scripture, we know both the intentions and the end. And it's not us that the end is that the conclusion is dependent on. It's God.
Amen.
So Muslims have a goal they have to achieve, but for us, God is the one that achieves it. We just follow. We're just commanded to follow His law and His commandments, and then God is the one that is going to be ultimately responsible for bringing peace to the world.
That's right.
And that's not a consequence of us following the law. That's just a consequence of His sovereignty.
Right.
So we have both the intentions behind following the law, which is to obey the one who created us, and to glorify God, and then we also have the God actually bringing peace to the world Himself. So we're not the ones that will bring peace to the world. It's God that will. Unlike what the Muslims are trying to do. For the Muslims, it's up to them.
Right.
So you kind of have that blind spot for Muslims, but we don't have that blind spot for Christianity. Similarly, with Alex's altruistic method, he doesn't, there's no way of knowing that something that he does is good may affect someone else. Like for instance, I don't know, Alex, if Alex has any children, and I don't want to pry, but let's just say for the sake of argument, he doesn't have any children, right? You have two people, him and then his wife, or we'll just say that. I don't know what his status there is either. But then you have another person that has 5 kids and a wife that has been unemployed for 2 years, and they're both applying for a job. Alex knows the guy's applying for a job, and gets the job. Well, Alex got the job and is feeding himself and his wife or what have you. Whereas the gentleman that didn't get the job, that still is without a job, and now he can't feed his 5 children and his wife. Was it moral for Alex to take that job, knowing the state of affairs that the other gentleman was in? So that's another implication. I mean, it does not solve anything. All it does is just confound the problem.
Yeah, it just doesn't answer the problem. It does. Right. It reduces to individual personal relativism, or at best, some type of social contract, which is just social or societal relativism, what Greg Kokel and Frank Beckwith call societal relativism. Right. So it really just skirts the issue, and this is the fundamental problem with any secular ethical system. And this is what, again, Peter Sosjet H. points out in his book, Neo-Nihilism. He points out, look, they're all secular ethical systems. You got to understand, this is an atheist that I'm referring to. So I'm plundering the Egyptians here. He is pointing out that they all reduce to this same problem. They all reduce the same problem: arbitrariness, relativism, and inconsistency.
And
he also points out, and one of the things I just want to mention about that book, he points out that you'll notice that in Western philosophy, which came out of a history of Christian theism, Western philosophy, as it's gone secular, it still tries to maintain some type of normalcy or some type of consistency with basic Judeo-Christian ethics, and the reason is because it sprung out of that. And he points out that they're trying to have They're wanting to have their cake and eat it too. They don't want the God of Christianity, but they want the ethics to go along with it. And I remember Richard Dawkins has made this type of statement in several different venues, that while he certainly detests the God of Christian theism, he would not want to get rid of the basic morality of Christian theism because he recognizes the benefit that it has on society.
Right. And one last thing, I suppose, Alex said that it's not that hard to understand that moral values cannot be objective. Well, apparently an atheist philosophy professor disagrees with them, so maybe the issue isn't quite as simple as he makes it out to be.
Right.
I think in that instance I would probably trust a philosophy professor over a guy on YouTube.
Yeah.
So
the guy's sharp. I recommend his book. I can't recommend it. I never thought I'd recommend an atheist book that much, but I really do. I think it's a great read.
Right. There's a couple of gems out there, but we've already gone over an hour, so, and my sinus headache is starting to get worse, so I guess I want to bring it to a close. Do you guys have any closing comments?
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate being on, and it was good to meet you, sir, for Brenden for this first time, and I look forward to further discussions in the future. God bless you.
Yeah, thanks. God bless you too.
All right, anything you want to say, Brenden?
Oh, I just, yeah, I think we've covered everything. Just one other thing was, I think Alex's view about causing the maximum amount of good and the least amount of harm is a popular view amongst many professed atheists, and I think Sam Harris is one of the main proponents of that view. And someone, I think it was Larry Castle, also pointed out that Sam Harris believes that free will is an illusion, that there is no free will because we're all just chemicals, matter and motion, and so he has that deterministic view, which I think is interesting. And someone, Larry asked if Alex held to that view as well. So I thought that was interesting.
Only in the atheist, one bag of chemicals wrong, another bag of chemicals. So.
But thanks for having me on, and it was great to meet you, Dustin, and first time too to talk with you, Jason, I think, in a hangout. So that was great.
Sure, appreciate you guys on. Just for me to close real quick, just summarize what we talked about. We determined that that for Alex the context of Deuteronomy 22 is not known. We've also shown that agency does not actually help him with explaining how moral values can be, how he can coherently have moral values in his worldview. Altruism doesn't help him either in that regard. And then also, of course, we covered that moral values are not independent of God; rather, they are God. They are actually dependent on God, not separate from Him. And that you can't get any less subjective than the ultimate authority in the universe and the creator of the universe. So that's really the summary of what we covered. So everybody who watched, we appreciate you watching. If you have any questions, my website's answersforhope.org. I have a quick Q&A section. You can click on that and send me a question or email. If you screen anything I say, you can send that to me too. I'll try and answer those on the websites unless it's a question that someone specifies they don't want to have answered on the website. So I try and answer all of them. Any string of insults or anything, of course, I'm not going to be responding to. But if you have those, I suppose you can email me those too. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody.